Listen, if your goal is to be liked by people, you will not persevere in faith. Listen to this. This is a terrifying warning from Jesus, John 5:44. How can you believe when you receive glory from one another and do not seek the glory that comes from the only God? Jesus, how can you believe when you're so consumed trying to get glory from one another that you're not even thinking about what does God think? Just as you can't love God and money, you can't live for the praise of man and long for the praise of God at the same time. Jesus calls us to have higher aspirations than human affirmation. You've got to be willing to be mocked in this world in order to hear, "Well done, good and faithful servant," in the world to come. Hearing those words will be worth whatever it costs you in this life. But Satan will do whatever he can to scare you to not live as a Christian. Proverbs 29:25, the fear of man is a snare. Satan sets a trap, getting us to be afraid of people's opinions. He wants you to be cowardly and hesitant, and to keep your convictions to yourself, to make sure you're not one of those Christians. Why do you think it's so scary to share the gospel? It's because it's legitimate spiritual warfare. Satan wants to blind people from seeing the glory of Christ, and our ambition should be to help everybody to see the glory of Christ. Are you willing to speak Jesus' name and proclaim the gospel, even if it makes you look like a fool? I want to read something to you. This is a guy named Dave went to a party and made a stand for Jesus and shared the gospel with a friend of his who was not a believer. I want to read you the letter that the unbeliever wrote back to him. He said, "Dude, we have to talk. It's great and all that you're Mr. Religious now, but I want you to know I'm worried about you. I want you to be careful that you don't go overboard and start getting all weird on me. I mean, I know you're going to church and it's a good thing and that God is real and all that, but if you don't watch it, you're going to miss out on what life is really all about. I know you're just trying to be a good boy and all, but when you came down here and you wouldn't drink, you looked like an idiot. I mean, you were just sitting there with a cork in your mouth. What is wrong with you? I'm not trying to be a jerk, but I'm really worried about you. I know you're just preaching at me because you're my boy and all that, but I know that I'm okay. God and I have our own little understanding. I know I get crazy now and again, but I don't think God's going to send me to hell for having a good time. I mean, He understands I'm just having a little fun. I'm not a bad person, and He knows my heart. I agree, I get a little crazy now and again, but it's good for the soul, right? Well, enough of that. I'm sure you'll be back to normal, and we could smoke a fatty to celebrate. Be a good boy and tell Jesus I said hi." That was me 25 years ago, when Dave came to a party at Virginia Tech and made a stand for Jesus. You see, I didn't want your Jesus. You know why? Because I loved my sin. I loved my sin. I love what my sin gave me. But for some reason, Jesus wanted me. And He sent Dave. And Dave told me later he was scared to death. He almost didn't come because he was afraid of what I'd say. But I'm eternally grateful that he did. God is calling you to be brave like Dave. There's friends, there's family, there's classmates, there's neighbors, there's nations. Jesus will help you. Tell Him that you're scared. He will be near. He promises He's with you to the very end of the age. Live for well done, good and faithful servant. It will be worth it. Thirdly, pleasure. To follow Jesus, you must be willing to deny your natural desires. Luke 9:23, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. Jesus warns that the devil's gospel is to follow your heart, to feed your passions and be true to yourself. But Jesus' gospel promises that if you trust Him, He will give you a new heart. He will transform your passions and He will make you like Himself. He'll give you strength to resist whatever pleasure seems good that is actually poison. Will you surrender your desires to Jesus? Listen, we have watched an entire we have watched a generation deconstruct their faith. Not an entire generation. We've watched a lot of people deconstruct their faith. And what's often declared by the deconstructors is that they've discovered some flaw, some insight, some hypocrisy that discredits Jesus or the Bible or the church. But they're often not being honest. The reality is that they found a desire that Jesus calls them to surrender, that they are unwilling to give up. Break up with that boyfriend or girlfriend that deep down you know you should not be with. Leave those sexual desires that seem so natural, but God tells you are against His will. Leave the culture's call to disregard God's biological design and follow me. Listen, it is true that heresy leads to immorality, but it is also typically true that immorality leads to heresy, where we've got to change God and mute Him so that we can live as we want. Now, please don't hear me downplaying abuse or hypocrisy or the torturous struggle of trying to follow Jesus with desires that are very contrary to what He says, but it's hard to follow Jesus. But I want you to know that it is worth it. The pleasure that He gives is infinitely better than anything the world can ever give you. Fourthly, pain. Pain. Some of you will suffer in ways that will tempt you to stop following Jesus. Some of you have known very little suffering. Some of you have known very much. If you live on this planet, you will know some. Maybe it's a health struggle. Maybe it's your parents' divorce. Maybe it's a betrayal of a friend. Maybe you've been hurt by a church experience. Maybe there's someone that you loved who died. Listen, suffering pushes you. It pushes you. It's either going to push you toward God in hope or away from Him in hardness. And affliction, please hear this. And I don't say this lightly. We're coming out of 2024 was the hardest year of my life, my family's life. It's been a hard year. But affliction is our friend if we allow it to have its intended effect. You see, suffering helps us to see God in ways that otherwise we could not. You've got to know, tuck this away in your heart, you've got to know that God is sovereign over your suffering and sympathetic in your suffering. His sovereignty assures you that He is powerful over all of your suffering, and His sympathy assures you that He loves you in your suffering. His sovereignty assures you that He is wise, while His sympathy assures you of His goodness. Listen, there are no pains and no problems that lay outside the hand of God. Everything that comes into our lives passes through the hands of a good God who loves you and is sovereignly and carefully and wisely using them for our good. But He is not just sovereign over, He is sympathetic in. He is the good shepherd who goes with you through the valley of the shadow of death. Jesus weeps with you at the tomb. He is a sympathetic high priest who intercedes for you. It's a hard truth, and it's hard when you're in it. It's so disorienting. And you will hear the whispers from hell that say, see, He's not worth it. See, this is what you get for following Him. And I want you to know that Jesus is worth it. And anything that He takes, He will replace exceedingly abundantly more than we could ask for or imagine. You can trust Him.